March 1945. The war in Europe is nearly won. Nazi Germany is collapsing. Every day, thousands of American soldiers are dying to bring this nightmare to an end. And then, one of America's greatest generals makes a decision that will haunt him forever. A decision that will cost hundreds of lives. A decision that many historians believe was influenced as much by personal concerns as by military judgment. This is the story of the Hammelburg Raid and the fury of Dwight D. Eisenhower. The date is March 26, 1945. At 3rd Army Headquarters in Germany, General George S. Patton is studying maps. His army has been unstoppable, racing across Germany faster than anyone thought possible. But according to historians who have studied his papers, Patton's mind appears focused on something beyond the grand strategy today, something more personal. 50 miles behind enemy lines, in a place called O-Flag 13B near Hammelburg, there's a prisoner of war camp. Inside that camp are approximately 1,500 Allied officers. Among them is Lieutenant Colonel John Knight Waters, Patton's son-in-law, married to his beloved daughter Beatrice. Waters had been captured in Tunisia back in February 1943, over 2 years ago. Patton's letters to his wife during this period revealed deep anguish over his son-in-law's captivity. And now, with his army so close, Patton sees an opportunity. But there's a problem, a massive problem. Hammelburg is deep in enemy territory. The Germans are desperate, dangerous, fighting with nothing to lose. Any rescue mission would be extremely risky. Military doctrine is clear. You don't risk hundreds of men to save prisoners when liberation is just weeks away. You wait. You let the advance do its work naturally. Patton doesn't wait. On March 26th, he summons Major General Manton Eddy, commander of 12th Corps. According to Eddy's testimony recorded in official Army histories, Patton orders him to organize a raid to Hammelburg. Eddy is stunned. He argues against it. The distance is too far. The force would be too small. The Germans too numerous. He recommends at least a full combat command, thousands of men. Patton refuses. According to the 12th Corps after-action report, he insists on a small, fast force. He tells Eddy to use Captain Abraham Baum's tank company, just 294 men, 53 vehicles, 16 tanks. That's it. To go 50 miles through German-held territory, liberate a POW camp, and somehow fight their way back. In later interviews, Eddy stated that he felt deeply uneasy about the mission, but Patton was his commanding officer. The order was given. Captain Abraham Baum was 24 years old, a tough, capable officer from the Bronx. When he received the order on the morning of March 26th, he was told this was a raid to liberate American POWs. According to Baum's own account, he was told the camp held about 300 prisoners. The real number was 5 times that. He was told German resistance would be light. It wouldn't be.
What Baum didn't know, what almost no one in the task force knew, was that Patton's son-in-law was in that camp. At 5 p.m. on March 26th, Task Force Baum rolled out. 16 Sherman tanks, 27 half-tracks, 3 105mm assault guns, jeeps, supply vehicles, and 294 men who had no idea they were heading into one of the war's most controversial missions. For the first few hours, according to survivor accounts, everything went surprisingly well. They moved fast through the darkness, catching German units off guard. They shot up enemy columns, knocked out vehicles, pushed forward with aggressive speed. By dawn on March 27th, they'd covered significant ground. But the Germans were waking up, and they were mobilizing. Task Force Baum started taking casualties. German troops, Hitler Youth, Volkssturm militia, they all engaged the Americans. The narrow roads became shooting galleries. The column was too long, too exposed. Vehicles broke down and had to be destroyed. Men were wounded. The ammunition was running low. At O-Flag 13B, the American prisoners had no idea rescue was coming. Lieutenant Colonel Waters had survived 2 years of captivity through discipline and hope. Hope that he'd see his wife again. Hope that his father-in-law's army would win the war. According to fellow prisoners' testimony, he had no idea that Patton had sent men specifically to that camp. On the morning of March 27th, the prisoners heard something. Gunfire. American gunfire. Getting closer. Task Force bomb burst through the German lines around the camp at approximately 3 p.m. on March 27th. The prisoners erupted in joy. Americans! They were being liberated. After years of captivity, freedom had arrived. But Captain Baum, according to his later accounts, looked at the scene with growing horror. He'd been told 300 prisoners. There were over 1,500. His vehicles were shot to pieces. His men were exhausted. He had maybe a dozen tanks still running, and he was supposed to get all these men out? It appeared impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Waters, ever the officer, tried to help. According to witness statements, he volunteered to approach the Serbian guards who were now surrendering to help organize the chaos. He walked forward with a white flag, and a German guard, either panicked or malicious, shot him. The bullet tore through his pelvis and lodged near his spine. Patton's son-in-law lay bleeding in the dirt while the liberation fell apart around him.
Baum made a desperate decision. According to multiple survivor accounts, they couldn't take everyone. They could barely take anyone. He told the prisoners to grab weapons from the German guards, to find vehicles, to escape however they could. Then he organized his remaining forces to fight their way back to American lines. They didn't make it. The Germans had surrounded them. Reinforcements were pouring in from every direction. Tank destroyers, infantry, artillery. The task force was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. By nightfall on March 27th, it was over. Every vehicle destroyed. Captain Baum was wounded and captured. According to official U.S. Army records, of the 294 men who started the mission, only about 35 made it back to American lines during the raid itself. 32 men were killed. More than 200 were wounded or captured. The mission was a complete disaster. But back at 3rd Army headquarters, Patton knew nothing of this yet. According to his Chief of Staff, General Hobart Gay's later statements, Patton was anxiously waiting for news, hoping for success. On March 28th, the reports started coming in. The task force was missing. No radio contact. Few survivors. Just silence. General Gay later described Patton's reaction as visibly shaken. According to historian Carlo d'Este's account in Patton, A Genius for War, Patton sought to limit attention on the raid while awaiting clearer reports about what had happened. But O-Flag 13B was liberated by the normal American advance on April 6, 1945. Waters was found, badly wounded but alive. He was evacuated to a hospital. He would survive, though he'd carry that bullet fragment for the rest of his life. And that's when people started asking questions. War correspondents heard rumors, a costly raid, massive casualties. For what? Then someone discovered that Waters had been in that camp, Patton's son-in-law. The pieces fell into place. Had Patton sent 300 men on a dangerous mission influenced by family concerns? According to multiple historical accounts, Patton immediately went on the defensive. He called the mission a reconnaissance in force. He later claimed he didn't know Waters was there, a claim that many historians, including Stanley Hirschson and Carlo d'Este, find unconvincing based on available evidence. He claimed he expected more success, that the intelligence was bad, that conditions had changed. But the damage was done. The story leaked to the press. Then it reached the one man whose opinion Patton feared most, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower and Patton had a complicated relationship. They'd known each other for decades. Eisenhower recognized Patton's genius as a combat commander, but he also knew Patton's weaknesses, the impulsiveness, the ego,
the tendency to let personal feelings influence professional decisions. Eisenhower had already saved Patton's career once after the slapping incidents in Sicily. But this was different. This wasn't slapping a shell-shocked soldier. This was a failed mission that cost American lives. According to Eisenhower's naval aide, Captain Harry Butcher, in his diary, My 3 Years with Eisenhower, when Eisenhower learned the full details of the Hammelburg Raid, he expressed sharp frustration and disapproval of Patton's judgment. On April 15, 1945, Eisenhower wrote a carefully worded letter to General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff. In it, according to the papers of Dwight David Eisenhower, he discussed what he termed Patton's latest crackpot action and expressed his frustration. He wrote that the raid had been poorly conceived and should not have been attempted. But Eisenhower was in an impossible position. The war was in its final weeks. Germany was about to surrender. Patton, despite his flaws, was still winning battles. His Third Army was performing brilliantly. Removing him now over a failed raid would be a disaster for morale and potentially for the war effort. So Eisenhower did what he'd done before. According to military historians, he reprimanded Patton privately. He made it clear this kind of recklessness was unacceptable, and then he kept him in command. But the cost was real. 32 young American men dead, over 200 captured or wounded, families destroyed, for a mission that most military historians regard as unnecessary, poorly planned, and questionable in its strategic value. It's important to note that Patton always maintained that Hammelburg was ordered for reconnaissance and morale reasons. Whether personal motives influenced the decision remains a matter of historical debate among scholars.
In his memoir, War as I Knew It, published after his death, Patton barely mentions Hammelburg. A few sentences, no detailed reflection, no apology. He presents it as a raid that encountered unexpected resistance. He never directly acknowledges the questions about his son-in-law's presence, but others did. Major General Manton Eddy, who'd argued against the mission from the start, later told historians he believed personal considerations may have influenced the decision. Captain Baum, who survived German captivity and the war, stated in multiple interviews that he felt he had not been given complete information about the mission. He said in a 1981 interview that if he'd known about Waters, he would have understood the mission differently, but that it didn't change the fact that the force was too small for the objective. Eisenhower, in his memoir, Crusade in Europe, never directly addresses Hammelburg in detail. But his letters from April 1945 make his feelings clear. He was deeply troubled by what he saw as poor judgment. But he was also constrained by the necessities of war. The Hammelburg Raid remains one of the most controversial decisions of Patton's career. It reveals something uncomfortable about even our greatest military leaders, that they're human, that they make mistakes, that sometimes personal concerns can cloud professional judgment. And when that happens, soldiers pay the price. John Waters recovered from his wounds and continued his Army career, eventually becoming a 4-star general. According to those who knew him, he rarely spoke publicly about Hammelburg. When asked, he would simply say that war is full of difficult decisions and that he harbored no bitterness. Captain Baum lived until 2009. In interviews late in his life, he expressed conflicted feelings, frustration at being sent on what he felt was an under-resourced mission, pride in his men's courage under impossible circumstances, and a lingering question. If Patton had sent a larger force, as Eddy recommended, could they have succeeded? We'll never know. What we do know is this. On March 26, 1945, 294 American soldiers were sent 50 miles behind enemy lines on a mission that military professionals considered extremely dangerous. 32 never came home.
Hundreds more were wounded or captured. The prisoners they were sent to rescue were liberated anyway, just 10 days later, by the normal American advance. And the man who ordered the mission faced private reprimand but continued in command. Because he was George S. Patton, and in the spring of 1945, Eisenhower still needed him to win the war. But the frustration was real, the questions were real, and the cost was real. This is the story they don't show you in the Hollywood versions. This is the moment when one of America's greatest warriors made a decision that has troubled historians for decades. And this is the moment when Eisenhower had to choose between accountability and necessity. He chose necessity, and 32 families paid the price.
This video presents historical events based on official military records, published memoirs, and documented accounts from participants, including Generals Patton, Eisenhower, Eddy, Captain Baum, and Lieutenant Colonel Waters. All information is drawn from the sources listed. Viewers are advised to consult multiple sources for study, whereas historical interpretations may vary among scholars and historians. This content is intended for educational purposes only.